Thanks for joining this morning. Today we're going to run through Emerald's P6-QA tool. And this tool is a tool that helps you automatically be able to detect things that aren't quite up to snuff in your P6 schedules. So it works right inside the P6 app. I'm coming to you actually from Montreal this morning. I'm Nicole Jardin. I'm the founder and CEO of Emerald Associates. And I'm going to run through the P6-QA software. So let's first talk about what is quality. Okay, now quality, of course, varies on your organization, different understandings of scheduling in particular is what we're focusing on today. And of course, experience level and just understanding of the software. So when we're talking about quality, what we're focusing on inside P6 is timing, resourcing, and costs. So those are the main focuses when we're talking about schedule quality. Now, what we find is some of the common struggles that we face when we're trying to put together good schedules are that we have different people with different ideas of what reliable and consistent schedules actually look like. So to me, the key thing here is that the schedule is easy to use, easy to understand, and helps you forecast who you need where to achieve the deliverables. That's the ultimate thing. Sometimes you might experience debates about logic, lags, leads, all this great stuff. Ultimately, in the end, if your schedule is not easy for someone to understand and follow, then you're not quite hitting the mark. So that's ultimately what you're trying to achieve. Now, then you need to be able to see where problems are occurring. Okay, so you need to be able to review if there's any bottlenecks, any struggles with getting the work done. If you can't see that and react to that, bring discussions forward so that you can fix any activities that are slipping. Your schedule is not what I would call a quality schedule. And in doing that, we're looking at what I mentioned earlier, timing, resourcing, and costing. But there might be certain business processes as well that your team needs to adhere to. Okay, so you might be a governmental group with contracts let, and there's certain standards that you've identified in contract that you're trying to monitor. So that's another thing that we've got in the QA tool. So the QA tool is very flexible. We can build additional quality checks as needed to monitor specific business processes that you're trying to follow. And of course, what happens is if you're in the boat where you've got a lot of schedules and you've got reviews to do, you might have to reach out to third-party contractors such as Emerald to help you with the schedule reviews. And that can be expensive because we don't know your schedule. We need to learn that, get up to speed. And if you have to do that over a 4 or 5 year project, that can be expensive. So what we try to do with the P6-QA tool is bring the knowledge that we've got from over 30 years of doing planning, scheduling, and project controls, try and put it into a system that is easy to use, even for the new beginner P6 user. So that was our objective, and I think that's really the benefit of what P6-QA can bring to your team. So let me jump in and start to explain to you how it works. And after I've done that, I will actually go in the software and I will show you how it works. And we'll run through some different examples and scenarios. And I'll explain to you how P6-QA works and how you can fit it into your day-to-day usage of P6. So let's start with schedule quality. So we typically always start with timing, so schedule. Then we go into resourcing, and then we go into cost. That's typically the way that you dig in to develop your schedule. And you may not be using every single aspect of P6, but that's what you'd want to grow into. is schedule, resourcing, and then costing. So let's start with the schedule. So typically what we're looking at with quality schedules is activities that are of reasonable duration with good logic, sequencing between the activities, nice and simple, tidy, and that way we've got it easier to manage, easier to work with, schedule. That's what we're looking for. Now, in doing that, we're hoping that we have minimal constraints. So we haven't put plugs or constraints all over the schedule. Because if you've done that, you're really working with more of a picture, more of a list, rather than a dynamic critical path schedule. So we're looking for that. And if you're doing resourcing, we're trying to make sure that the resourcing has reasonable numbers, reasonable value. You don't have activities that are sort of all over the place with small activities and large activities and things like that. So we'll look at some of that. And of course, the schedule is only as good as the day you start executing is only as good as how you're updating. So we have quality checks on the updating processes as well, which is crucial because you put all that effort into putting a strong plan together. You have to continue the work during the life cycle of the project as it progresses. Now, there are many standards out in the business environment. There's lots of different standards. A very common one is DCMA, the GAO, AEC, and PMI. And this P6-QA will fit the bill on the bulk of what those different standards are asking for. And worst case, if you've got some of your own, we can always add them to the system. Okay, so every one of our clients we've deployed to have some specific checks that they've asked for, and we can add them to the system as well. So it's very flexible. It's not a huge effort. You can usually add a business quality check in a few hours. Now, in terms of business processes, so we kind of categorize things into schedule quality checks and then business process quality checks. So things like checking whether you've got activity names that are duplicated or activity IDs that don't have a certain pattern to the format. If you've got a standard you're asking the team to follow. The same holds true for project naming, project numbering. There may be a standard you're asking the team to follow when they're submitting, let's say, a contractor schedule, for example. So we can monitor that, we can flag it so that it's much quicker for the team not to have to dig through those types of things. And the same would hold true for resources and expenses. So we've got business process checks on all those layers. So what this lets you do is establish different corporate standards. So you might have, if within your project mix, if you're an operating company like a oil and gas company or a mining company, you might have CapEx, OpEx projects, shutdowns, turnarounds, and outage type projects. Each one of them will have slightly different requirements on the monitoring, partly because of the length and just partly because of the nature of those projects. So you can set up different standards so you don't have to have one standard across all the projects. So it's very flexible, and I'll run through how you do that. And the same would hold true if you've got other types of projects. Like we did a software as a service for an IT group running large IT projects to help them find where the projects were put together quite the way they needed to be. And of course, long range planning. So if you've got a 25-year long range plan, again, slightly different requirements will come into play. And then different phases. Different phases would generally have different standards as well. When you're at a proposal stage, perhaps 2 to 5 years out before you're actually executing the project, you might have a little less rigorous standard than when you're starting to get it approved and moving into execution. So again, the point here is just to highlight that P6-QA is not a one size has to fit all. very flexible. You can set up different standards for different types of projects to make it really meaningful for your team. Okay, so I'm going to switch over and actually run through the software and give you a look, a real live look at how the software works. Okay, so I'm going to switch over. Shannon, can you see it? And is it sort of the right sort of size? Can you read it?
I can see it, and yes, it.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so let me give you the lay of the land that you're looking at here. Okay, so I've logged into our demo environment, and I'm using the P6 client to show you the QA tool. Now, the QA tool can be used in P6 Web as well. So it's not like it's just for the client. You can use it in either of the environments. If your team uses P6 Web, or if some of the team uses P6 Web, the functionality sits in both of the P6 options. Now, I've got a handful of projects that have the P6-QA has been run on those projects. So let me explain what we're looking at. So we're looking at a layout. It's called Schedule Quality Indicators, and it's, of course, at the project level that we're looking at these quality indicators, the flags. So we've run the QA on a handful of projects, and you can see some have some good things and some have some issues. Okay, so you've got a very quick, easy to use sort of dashboard right within P6, so the team can see where they've got still some work to do and where they're doing fine on their scheduled development. So let me run through some of the quality metrics that we're checking, and these are pretty common across all those different standards: the DCMA, GAL, PMI, AAC, and other. So looking at durations is pretty darn common. We want to identify activities that have high durations. Now, why is that? Because high duration activities are harder to manage and harder to update. Okay, so you don't want a lot of those in your schedule. So that's why that's part of the quality check. High float. High float is another one. So typically, high float means the activity can move around a lot and it won't bump the end date of the project. Well, that could be a signal that you possibly missed some logic, meaning there's an open end, what would be called an open end, which means you either are missing a successor or possibly a predecessor. Okay, so those are things that you need to be checking, because if you missed a logic tie on some activities, your critical path could be incorrect, and you could actually have criticality on activities that just got missed in logic development. So you don't want to have that. So that's a key thing for you to be monitoring and managing and making sure you don't have any open ends. Now, together with logic, we have this concept of, in P6, a lag, a positive or negative lag. So a negative lag may also be referred to as a lead. So we're wanting to look at whether we have any positive and or negative lags in the system. Okay, so in this case, if we've got a green check mark, it means that we either have none or we have not too many of them. And I'll talk about what the criteria is, and we'll look at this notebook at the bottom, which will help us understand what is making something red versus green. Now, let's touch on the next one. So the simplest type of schedule to work with is the one that has the bulk of the logic as a finish to start. So we want that kind of schedule. Now, some of you might say, well, that's crazy, it's impossible, because it's going to make too many activities. Well, I'm a big believer that more activities that are easy to update is actually a better thing than less activities that are very frustrating to update, very frustrating to explain to people when you're supposed to get started. Okay, so that's really what this is driving at. Let's minimize non-finish to start logic. And you can see we've got a red flag here, meaning we've got a lot that are probably start to starts with lags, finish to finish with lags, and possibly start to finish as well. Okay, so we're monitoring start to finish explicitly on activities, and so you can do that as well. So you can identify very specific things you want to monitor, and you can add those to the QA tool. Now, currently, you need to have Emerald help you do that. So, but it's not a big effort for us, and we can typically add a logic, an additional quality metric check with just a few hours of work. So there typically is a little bit of consulting in rolling out the QA tool. Now, on these last few points, we're monitoring whether we've got hard constraints, soft constraints, and the definition of those is typically the mandatory versus the on or before, on or after type of constraints. Okay, so they're typically classed as two different type of metric and monitored separately, just because of the influence on the schedule can be quite different. Okay, so that's why they're generally monitored as two distinct categories. And in this last case, we're monitoring resources. Okay, so whether we've put resources on the activities and what that all means. So let me go a little further and explain what we're seeing in the notebook. Okay, so let me go to the notebook that is matching schedule quality. And you can see that in this example, we've split those to the DCMA specific quality metrics. Okay, so we can make specific notebooks depending on the type of quality standard your team is adhering to. So if you were doing a GAO, we could have a GAO specific quality notebook for you, which makes it very easy to communicate to management where we've got some issues with the schedule that we've either built or we're critiquing because we're receiving it perhaps from an engineering firm or perhaps from a construction company. So let me dig into the schedule quality one, and I can go into modify, which will let me take the full screen, which makes it just a little bit easier to walk through. Okay, so some of those quality gates that we saw on the scheduling, they're listed inside of here, and there could be additional ones as well. So you can see that we have targets, and it's a percentage. So what we're saying there is if we can go with a zero tolerance, so meaning no activities can have this problem. In this case, an open end. So if we say zero tolerance, this is letting us know that we have 10 activities out of 27 that it looked at. And of course, that's a high percentage. So even if we have a slight tolerance, like 5 activities out of 100 could have an open end, we're way beyond that. Okay, so we clearly have some struggles, or we just maybe haven't finished getting our predecessors and successors all sorted out. Now, in addition to this quick overview, okay, which complements the flags that we've got on screen, we can dig in to see the specifics of those open ends. Okay, so this gives us a list. Now, it may not be the full list because in some cases the list could be darn long. So we give you a sampling, and you can set the sample size. So if we want to keep this report short, we might only show 10, the first 10. If we're okay for it to be longer, we might say, give us the first 50. But that's configurable in any case, depending on what you want in this report, okay? And we can always dig into the activities. So the report may have a slightly different audience than, of course, the P6 end user who's going to go and either fix that up or critique back to the contractor or engineering company where they've got some issues and what we would like done on that. So this report complements what we see on the screen in the dashboard. Okay. Now, these are configurable. These targets are configurable. So let me just go to layout that marries up with this. And my layout is the schedule quality criteria. Okay, so these marry up. They're the A series of layouts. So this is how easy this is to work with from a P6 user perspective. So inside of the criteria layout, I set up what my criteria is. Now, the criteria is, it depends on what we're monitoring. Okay, so if we're monitoring logic, the criteria is a percentage of the activities. So if we have 100 activities in the schedule, a 5% is saying that as long as I have 5 activities or less with an open end, then it would give me a green flag. But as soon as I hit more than 5, then it should show red. Okay, so this allows you to set your tolerance depending on where you are in the project development. So if you're early stages, you can have a higher tolerance knowing that they're working through them. Or if you prefer, you can just set all the tolerances at 0. Okay, so completely configurable, up to you. And that allows you to have different settings for different project types as well. Now, some of the quality metrics require a bit more information to go along with the percentage, so the red and green. So duration is a good example. So duration, we're setting how many activities can have a high duration. But in addition, we need to set what is a high duration. Okay, so these are targeted in hours. P6 works in hours in the back end, so we put the data in hours. And again, this allows us to make it specific to the kind of project. So a turnaround or a shutdown outage type project where we're scheduling in hours, our tolerance may be quite low for what we call a long activity. So a rule of thumb to use is 3 update cycles. That's a pretty good standard rule of thumb. So anything that's longer than 3 update cycles starts to become difficult to update. So in a turnaround, 3 update cycles might be 72 hours if you're doing it daily. If you're doing it every shift, it might be 36 hours. On a capital project that's a few years long, you might be updating every week. Okay, so then you would adapt that based on the project specifics that you're working with. So this is how easy the configurations are to set up. We try, in all our tools, we try to take full advantage of P6 out of the box functionality so that the main users are not having to relearn another tool. And that's what we've done here with the QA as well. We've embedded the bulk of it right inside the app. Okay, so here's a schedule that we need to run the QA on, because you can see that it hasn't been run on this schedule. It was run a few days ago, and it will be part of the QA projects. So this is another thing. You don't have to run QA on every project, it's your choice. So if you don't want to run it on some projects, you can set them to no. If you do want to run it on some projects, you can set them to yes. And then if it is a project you want to run QA on, you have some choices as to how you're going to run it. So you can have it run automatically using any of these settings, hourly through to monthly. Or you can run it ad hoc, and you can run it manually. Okay, so that would work well if you run it when you receive a project from a contractor or an engineering firm. So you can just set it to manual, and it will only run when you tell it to. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and run it on this project so you guys can see how easy this is to run. So what I do is I clear the last run date. I hit enter, I save it to the system, and that's all it takes to tell P6-QA to get going and start running the analysis on this project. Okay. Now, it might take a few seconds or a few minutes. It depends, of course, how big the project is and whether or not you've ever run QA on it. Okay. So it ran. I have my flags, my metrics at the project level. It lets me know the last time I ran it, which of course in where I am, that's 10 o'clock. And it gives me the information here. And what it will do is we'll update all these notebooks as well. Okay. So here I've got the information on the notebooks just based on what just occurred. Okay, so here's the schedule quality one that I was just showing you, and we have a bunch of others. Okay, so we check calendars. Here's an interesting example that we built. We check calendars because we want to see whether the calendars are all over the place on this project, and we identify calendars that may be a little odd. As you're seeing here in this example, this is a 24-hour-a-day calendar. And it's just so that you can see whether or not we've got mismatches across activities. Okay, so again, this is a specific business process, one that we've written for a few of our clients. They wanted calendar verifications. So you can go very deep into the types of things that you want to see. Okay, now let me go into this project and let's actually dig in to what created these flags. Okay, so the way we set this up to make it super simple for the users is we make activity layouts that match the project layouts that are the summary, if you will. So here's my project. It's quite a simple project. I've got some finish milestones, got some start milestones, level of efforts, tasks, and I've grouped it by the activity type so that I can trace the logic very, very quickly. Now, I can see whether I've got any predecessors that are open, successors that are open. Now, with the finish milestone, if it's truly the end of the project, it's not that surprising if we've got a successor open. Okay, so that is normal that you might have that. So in this case, to let QA know that I'm okay with that logic, that in this case, the open end being open with no successor, I can overwrite the metric that QA is finding and let QA know that this is all right. Okay, so that helps make sure that when I validated something, it doesn't keep reminding me and bugging me that there's a problem here. Okay, so I can overwrite these using this star. Now in this case, that's the only issue across here. So I could overwrite this one as well. Okay, now I would just leave it as a warning because it's conceivable I might get a different problem down the road. Okay, but if you wish, you can overwrite the overall validation as well. Now let's look at some float, but no open end. Okay, so that might be all right. Okay, because what we want to see is if I have a high float with an open end missing. So this is letting me know I forgot to tie up the front, the predecessor of this. So I've got a high float and I do have a missing logic tie. So I probably need to fix that. This is the opposite. So I've got a high float and a missing successor. So this lets me know that I better fix these up. Okay. So that's very easy. And another easy thing you can do is you can sort these by the flags so you get the problems right at the top. So it makes it very easy to work with and make corrections. Let's take a look at the logic types, being problems, and leads and lags. Okay. So let's go ahead and pop open the relationships. So I've got a logic type problem, finish to finish, with a negative lag, and they're large lags. So I may want to fix these up, okay, and change the logic types. Perhaps I need to split the activity. There's many things. And fix these. There we go. Okay, just so you get the idea of it. Okay, I probably can't fix that. It's going to be a milestone, and I'm going to just remove these lags just so you get the idea of it. Okay, obviously you would do a bit more light work than just changing it, but for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and change those, and then I'm going to rerun the P6-QA. So I just clear the value, I save it to the database, I refresh it, and it will rerun. I'll go over here so you can see if these get cleaned up. There you go. Okay, so it's run through and it's noticed my edits and it's now changing the flagging. Okay, so the whole intent when we built this tool was to help the day-to-day scheduler who either needs to critique, self-critique, doesn't have to wait for the senior scheduler to come and critique his schedule, which sometimes can be very, very challenging if you're a very busy group. So you want to be able to self-critique. You want to be able to fix your mistakes or things that weren't quite right and keep moving ahead. So that was the intent when we built P6-QA. Now, some of you might critique schedules. So the same idea, you load the schedule up, you critique it, and you can critique it very quickly. Okay, so that was an example of when a project is being developed. I'm going to run through a project that was updated as well. Now, before I jump into that, let's just touch on some of the business process validations that could be interesting when you're planning out your schedule as well. Okay, so I'm switching to a layout that shows me the business process validations separate to the schedule quality validations. And again, I've got a matching notebook down here that marries up to the business process validation. So it's really, really easy to work with. Now, some of the ones we have here in our example is we want to validate the activity ID format. We want to make sure we have no duplicate activity names, which can be a total nightmare when the name says inspect, inspect, inspect. Well, inspect what, right? So as soon as you don't do your layout by WBS, the inspect doesn't make any sense. So, this is something that a lot of our clients want a critique on. So this is super handy to have that. Activity types. Okay, so again, you might have standards that all your activities have to be fixed duration, fixed units. You can monitor things like that. So we can see we've got some issues here, we've got some problems. Mandatory codes. So this is one that we get asked a lot. How can I make a code mandatory in P6? Well, unfortunately, we don't have that functionality. So we've built it in to the QA. So if a code needs to be put in, maybe for reporting or for validations, or you want the contractor to have it, this is something we've got in this tool. So we've got specific codes that are set as mandatory, and it's an automatic setting. It's a certain way of naming the code that we're using to flag it as mandatory. So super handy, saves you a lot of digging, and really, really easy to use. Then we have here on our example things related to resources and cost accounts. So we're monitoring whether a resource you must have at least one primary resource. So this can be really useful when you're running reports with a primary resource. If you're using role reports, okay, so in version 20 Oracle added some fantastic functionality related to roles. Okay, so they've got role limits now, which is great. They've got role dollars changing over time, like we had on resources, which is great. It's something that I've been begging for years. So it's wonderful that they've added that. And they've added role codes. They've added resource assignment codes. So they've done a lot of nice improvements to the tool around resources and roles. So if you're using roles for reporting, of course, it's going to be super important to have those as part of your project schedules. Okay? Expense categories, cost accounts, and monitoring whether we're using steps on physical percent complete activity types. So these are just food for thought. Okay? You can add additional ones, but these are some pretty common ones that clients were asking for. Okay? So you can monitor all of those. So within the schedule that I was in, I'll go right back to it, and I'll open the business process layout. Okay, so you can get a feel for what that looks like down in the details of the activities. So we can see that we've got problems on just about every activity, which could be true at the beginning, and hopefully as you work through, you get less and less. Okay, so this is a work in progress, and that's what it's there for. It's to help you improve this. So we can see some mandatory codes are missing. So let me show you what it's monitoring here. Okay, so mandatory codes are set by identifying what the flag is going to be for a mandatory. So let me go to one that doesn't have it. Well, that's not a good example. Let's just see. Looks like they're all mandatory. Okay, so mandatories are set. Let me show you how they're set so you can get an idea of it. So mandatories are set in this database using this little identifier, a bracket, an asterisk, a bracket. So the responsibility is being set as a mandatory code, as is work type. And I can just control F to find these. Okay, so you can set whatever you want as mandatory. It's just by establishing the standard. So we've got work type, responsibility. It looks like the EPDW turnaround phase is set as mandatory. And we've got another one in there. So area is usually quite a good one to have as a good code. So you can do geographical tagging, unit, section, work order services. So we have quite a few. So it's actually no wonder really that these are missing some of those. Okay. So what you would do is you've got to go in and assign them and clear these out. So you got to work through that and make that improvement. So that's the way that you would use these. We mentioned the activity type, okay, not being set right. So this is fixed duration in units per time. And you might realize that this is doing something strange on the screen. There we go. Some activities like milestones, for example, cannot be set fixed duration and fixed units. They can't be. So you can see we skip monitoring those, okay? So we know they can't match that, so we skip them. So we don't want to give you a penalty on your metrics when it's not something you can even set in P6. Okay, so I think I've given you a flavor of that. Let's just take a look at some of the resource ones. Okay, these are pretty straightforward. So we're monitoring whether a role is missing, whether a cost account is missing. So we can see here the cost account's missing. And looks like the role has been filled in and we should rerun it. And so that's the way that this is going to give you the flagging. Okay, so again, the intent is so you can go fix up as you're working and not waiting for someone to help you critique the schedule, not having to go get a third-party vendor to help you do the critiquing. Okay, so it should save you a lot of time and money and frustration. So the last area I wanted to touch on is updating. Okay, So let me switch to my updating metrics. And let's look at updating. So I've got another project here. I'm going to use this one, this first progress. So on updating, there's a variety of things that you might want to monitor. Okay, so we want to monitor something to do with durations, something to do with dates, something to do with budgets, so related to resources, budgets related to costs. And again, you can mix and match and use the pieces that your team is using currently in P6. So in this example, we're checking the remaining duration versus original duration, the actual duration versus the budget original duration. We're looking at original duration to budget. We're trying to make sure that things are not growing in their duration. And if so, we want them flagged, okay? Because that's a red flag. It's something you want to be watching for. You also want to watch dates. You want to watch whether the activity is planned is now forecasted to be finished late, because you want to see those, right? Now, some of them might be okay to be late, but others may not be. So you want to be watching that. So we're flagging them explicitly in the system. We also want to look at whether the data we put in makes sense. So, for example, data date. Our data date is the date up to which the updates have been taken. Now, if an actual start or an actual finish is after the data date, that could be a mistype. So we want to monitor those. And we've got two different ones here that monitor that. Okay, so let's say that I've received this schedule in from the contractor perhaps, and I want to monitor it, have QA run on it. Again, same thing, I'll just clear the date, ask it to rerun. And again, it'll just take a minute or two, depending, again, how big the schedule is and whether you've ever monitored it before. So the first time it could take a bit longer, no doubt, than an update. Okay, there we go. We've got some flagging here. Okay, so we can see some activities are running late. We've got some durations that are growing compared to our original. We've got some negative float. Okay, so that means we're trending to be late on our project, and we need to see that. We need to do something about that. We've got to work with the activities and clean them up, perhaps overlap them, perhaps split them, perhaps double up the crews or change the calendars. So there's things we're going to need to do to fix that negative flow. We've got some resources that look like they should have actuals, but they're missing. So we've got some activities in progress and the resources have no hours on them. So that's something to understand, because your cost forecasting could be wrong if resource updating has been missed. Okay. So again, we've got a report that goes along with it, and you can look at the report and you can dig through the report. And this is also something that you can cut and paste or copy and paste out to Word, out to an email, to communicate out to others what is going on with this schedule. Okay, so this notebook is super handy to communicate out to the non-P6 users. So we can open this project and we can dig into what was going on with those updates. So once again, very simple. I've got a matching layout for my updating, and it goes through the different quality checks. Okay, so we can see that we've got some durations that are changing. So remaining durations have been bumped up. So this is something you're going to want to talk to them about. We want to understand why these have been bumped up, right? It could be totally legitimate, but it could also be something that we want to work on to perhaps bring it back down, okay? Either by perhaps working overtime, adding additional crews. You know, there's a variety of ways that you can address this growing duration. We want to, of course, check whether the dates put into the update make sense. So let me just see what my data date is on this project. So my data date is a little bit weird. It's last year, so we'll work with that, 15th of May. Typically, that data date should be updated every time, so it would be a 2021 if you're doing a good scheduling methodology. But this is a demo database, so we've got old data in here. So yeah, we can see that our start date is after our data date. So that's a bit weird, but you might be okay with it because maybe they said, I'm going to update up to the end of the week. So some of the dates might be forecasted. Okay, so it's something you're going to want to monitor and verify with the updater that these things truly did get started ahead of the data date. Normally, you would put the data date to the end of the week, so that wouldn't show up this way. So this is something to question. It could also just be a data entry mistake. Okay, we've seen that many times. So this could just be a data entry mistake, in which case I should be fixing that. Okay, I picked the wrong date. Perhaps it was an April date. Okay, so I could fix that. Okay, so this is how handy this can be. It flags right away things that don't make a lot of sense. Now let's look at the resources. Okay, so what this is showing me is my resource is going over, and that's in a cost base. You can also look at the units, so I'll just scroll over a little bit, and we can see the units are over. So again, you're going to want to question these things. So why are they over? You know, are we going to be able to bring it back? Like, what is the thought process here? Now this one's kind of handy because this activity got started, but we have no resource hours. So we need to question whether that's correct or whether they missed doing the update. Okay, so you don't want your forecast to be incorrect. So this one is super handy. Okay, so I think I've given you a good flavor of the types of things that you can do with the QA tool. And you can do more. So for our clients, we've added additional ones. I showed you the calendar. I showed you the mandatory codes. We've got a variety of different ones that we've added for different monitoring of fields, wrong date order, no AFE. So one of our clients, they needed AFEs put into the system before, which is an authorization for expenditure that needed to happen before any progress was taking place. Okay, so you can add many different metrics that you want to monitor within the system. Okay, so this is just a food for thought. And the additional type of metrics is just flat out statistics that we run. Okay, so these run number counts for different categories. Okay, so how many activities had a remaining duration greater than the original? Okay, and then you can graph those. So a lot of our clients use the data in that we push out into our data warehouse, and then they put it into their reporting engines. So Tableau, Power BI, we've got clients using different ones, business objects, Oracle. Oracle has their Oracle tools as well. So you can push them out from there to any reporting engine afterwards. So it's fantastic tool, easy to use, easy to get reporting out, and really designed to be a big help to your scheduling team. Okay, now, I didn't mention you can ask questions, but of course, you can go ahead and ask questions. And if you have any right now, go ahead and chat them through, either to the question area or the chat. While I'm in the software, I'm happy to show anything that you might have a question for. Okay. If there's nothing coming to mind right now, that's okay. We can definitely communicate after the presentation as well. Okay, well, no one's putting any questions just yet, so hopefully that means it's because it's clear and it's understandable. And hopefully you're seeing some ideas as to how you could apply this in your work environment. So I'm going to stop sharing P6 and I'm going to go back to the presentation and we'll just do a quick wrap up. So really the steps that I was showing you to put together the QA is you input your validation criteria. You decide which data elements you want to monitor. And then you input the validation criteria. You run the analysis as you saw, and you can make the fixes and rerun the analysis. So it's really quite easy to use. Then in addition, you can snapshot and push out to our data warehouse, which is a separate software tool for your reporting engine. And then you've got the history, and you can do time over time type of reports. So this is an example of the kind of reports that we put together for clients. Oops, sorry, I clicked off the wrong screen. That we've got the validation with time over time, and then specific validations and statistics and whatnot. Okay, so you can output in many different formats, just depending on your requirements. So a time over time report could be something like this, where we have one project and we're seeing the validations change over time. Hopefully going from red to green, but in some cases it could go from green back to red. Okay, so that's the kind of output, and there's lots of different formats you can output this into. So let me touch on some of the benefits that our clients have seen from using the tool. Okay, so really one of the key things is the improvement of their schedulers' skills, because it's self-serve, it's online, it's streamlining the learning, and it streamlines immediately for the users how to self-correct. So that was really our driver here. Some of our clients have large scheduling groups, hundreds of users. Some are new to using P6 and some are longtime experts. So we really wanted to help them bring the team, up to a high standard quickly. So that was a big objective from the tool. It also makes it much easier to self-critique, as we've discussed, and I don't need to go and ask the lead scheduler every time I get a contractor scheduled in. Okay, so that's a big win there for the users, and that was part of the driving force of building the tool. It just, the ability to add your own metrics in there, so you can, have your business processes followed within the group and within the community you're working with, contractors, engineers, and so on. It really makes portfolio management much easier. Now that brings a huge level of confidence within your group, within the management, that what you're providing is solid. And the win there with the management team can be really immeasurable. So that's an important thing to think about. And you saw how fast it was to use, right? So this quote is actually a quote from my client. I received, I was doing a software as a service for a large developer in the US. Well, they were doing large projects, but they were not a large developer. They had no scheduling team. So I helped them validate an 8,000 activity schedule in less than 2 hours. And I knew right away that the critical path was not making any sense. Okay, so this was a very, very quick win for them. And the QA tool, I could never have done it that quickly without the QA tool. So this is the case study related to that. The project was massive. It's $600 million project, so a very big output for them. It was in the middle of New York City. Very, very hard work conditions. It was a pencil building, and I think it was 80 stories tall, if not more. So we critiqued the schedule. I say here less than 4 hours, because we had a bit of back and forth explanation, but I did the critique and then the output in less than 2, and then we went back and forth. The schedule had tons of open ends. The critical path was not true or usable. The durations were all over the place. And it was enough for the CFO, who was not a scheduler by any stretch, to be able to go back and let the contractor know that they had to fix these problems before they could even consider having the ability to get on the job site. Okay, so very important, and it really minimized the risk of going forward. Let me just finish this last case study, and then we'll jump into the question. There's a question that's come through. Whoops, my mistake. So then just another example of a key client we're working with. It's for a major program in the US. It's a DOT, and the engineering firm Garver is using the P6-QA as a huge value add. So they're helping administer the program with hundreds of projects on the go, with the DOT's engineering leads helping do the critiques. So they get schedule updates in weekly or every 2 weeks. So they have a lot of schedules to critique, and they have many contractual obligations that need to be adhered to. So the local engineers, they're not P6 experts. They can do the critiques, and they can reach out to the Garver expert P6 team if there's something they're unclear on. This is saving them huge numbers of dollars every single month with the tool running. We've been running it for over 2 years with them, and it's been really, really a huge time saver. And they can critique quickly, and they can get the feedback to the contractor where there's problems. And the thing is, it takes the subjectivity out of the mix, because all the schedules that they receive are being run with the exact same validation. Okay, so that's a huge win for the DOT. And it's saving them hundreds of hours every single month. Okay, so let's jump in. There was one question I saw that came in, maybe two. Okay. Okay, how can we handle the schedule levels, as schedule development is a tentative process? Starts with level 1 and ends at level 3 or 4. Okay, yes, that's a good question. So there's a few different ways that I would tackle this. Okay, so it depends on whether I put my level 1 and 2 schedule in a different project than my level 3 or 4, which is my preference. If I can do that, that's the way I would build it. So I would have different quality metrics set up for my level 1 and 2, with probably a little bit more leeway on durations, of course. Durations will be longer. The logic types always having to be finished to start. We need a little more leeway on that if we've got a more summary level schedule. So I think that is an exact good fit for QA. On the level 3 and 4, we're expecting smaller durations, much more precise activities, many more finish to starts, and a lot less start to start, a lot less finish to finish, a lot less leads and lags. So we'd be a little more strict. We'd be much stricter on the policies for a level 3 or 4 schedule than we would be on a level 1 and 2. And what we've done with our clients in these situations is we have a level 1, 2 preset standard on a template. We use those to build those out. And the level 3 and 4 that we receive from the client, we may give them the pre-existing list, or when we get it in, we do a fill down on it. Or we can use our P6 loader to load them up from Excel in. So in Garver's case, that's how they do it. They use the P6 loader to load up the metrics, the quality metrics, when they get a new schedule, so that it's really super quick and there's no debate, no mistakes made as well. Okay, so hopefully I answered that. Hopefully I answered that question. If not, feel free to throw a follow-up in there, which would be fine. Okay, so I'm just about finished up. So, I do appreciate you joining. If there are some follow-ups that you would like us to do, we've got a quick little poll there, just so that we can make sure that we're communicating appropriately for you on whether or not, you see something of interest, you'd like to understand the pricing. The pricing is not per user, it's per quality check. So we give, I think it's less than $300 US a month, or a million, I think it's 1 million or 2 million quality checks. So it's really inexpensive when you think of the number of users who can be quality metricing their whole schedule. It's not a user-based system, so it's quality check-based, and that's for our standard package. And then, if you just want to stay informed, that's fine too. So please go ahead and fill that out. That just helps us know how to keep communicating with you and how Emerald can help you. Now, this is just one of many tools that we've built for P6, and we've got tools that we've built for contract management or expedition. Still need people using that. People who've moved over to Unifier, we've got tools for that. So definitely feel free to reach out, because we've always had programmers on our team. So we've got a large toolkit for P6. We've got a large experience base in integrations and special automations. And that's what our P6 calculator tool really is designed for. It's to help you automate all sorts of things within P6 that you can't do out of the box. Okay. And if you want to reach out to me directly, here's my contact info as well. Okay, so I don't see any other questions, so we can close out here. And definitely, if there's something that comes to mind after the webinar, feel free to reach out. We're happy to help answer any additional questions. So thanks so much for joining. I'm going to stop the recording here. I'll stay on for another minute if anyone has a question, and otherwise we'll close it. Have a great day.